Hi, and welcome to Talking Wildfire with Michael Hill. Today, we're lucky enough to have Grant Beck back, and we're going to be talking about mental health within the insurance and also wildland fire space. And this could also be connected to fire in general or people that are first responders. And Grant has got a really interesting background. And Grant, can you tell us a little bit about your background? And then let's talk some mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Happy to be back again. My background, 15 years now in the fire service industry, 10 years in the insurance industry, and a huge part of that's been around disaster response, be it to bushfires, floods, cyclones, the huge part in floods and fires, and bringing those together. So my background's been quite varied between the two. But I think a big part of it is that, doesn't matter whether it's a flood or a fire, they're both the same thing in my eyes. And I've spent a lot of my career working in that space.
And Grant, we talked a little bit offline about the difference between fires and floods. And could you talk a little bit more about that, just a little bit deeper about how people react to each or what you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. I think, in my personal opinion, I don't see a lot of difference between how flood and fire affect people. If anything, I think a flood at times can be more devastating than a bushfire, and in other circumstances, a fire more devastating than a flood. I think with a fire, it devastates, tremendously. Yeah, everything's gone. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's taken down to ashes. In a flood, everything is still there, to within a sense, and that it's damaged. So it's you know that you have that item, you know that that's yours, and you know that it's now damaged, and you see it starting to become more and more damaged as it breaks down and becomes destroyed. And I think the toll that has on people is just as bad as fire, and seeing those possessions completely destroyed to ashes. So I think, there's not a lot of difference in my mind, but they both are quite traumatic.
And would you say that with the mold and stuff that happens after the floods, is that part of the breakdown process, you mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you might have paintings or pictures, furniture, and everybody has, it's not a house, it's a home, and that home and your items within those homes have sentimental purposes. So to see them become damaged, destroyed, mold creating, and seeing them break down has that lasting effect on people.
And Grant, over the years, I know you've dealt with a lot of high intensity emotions, and you work in a space that could be considered volatile with emotions. Could you tell us a little bit about the mental health aspect of the job and what you've experienced? And maybe towards the end of our talk, if we could talk a little bit about some tactics that people could, in similar situations, or maybe ideas that they could get from your own experience where they could help dealing with their own situations. Let's talk some
Yeah,
mental health today here. Yeah.
no worries. Happy to. And yeah, you're exactly right. The emergency services and the insurance industry, they're both high stake, high emotions, high operating industries, especially in the assessing space, and even, in the insurance industry, the call centers, the staff that take the calls, all the way down to the assessors and the teams that go out on the ground and are on the front line. Um, the emotions are always high. Customers don't know whether their claim's going to be accepted or declined. So there's a lot of built up anxiety and fear that's coming with that, because, at the end of the day, there is a financial impact that's occurred to them that they might not be able to come back from without that support of their insurance policy. And those assessors are out there in those environments, assessing and talking and really involved in that person or those customers' trauma. I think a big part I see the difference between the two industries is in the emergency service industry that I'm involved in is we get called to a job, and that job could be anything from a bushfire, a house fire, a motor vehicle accident. Could be any sort of traumatic injury that might occur to somebody, that there's a trauma there. You go out and you deal with what's done, and you deal with it professionally, and then you leave that. And you don't so much know the person or get to know the person, if that's a fair enough call. But in the insurance industry, there's a bit of the opposite, where you're now going in after that person has had that traumatic experience happen to them. You get to know them. You're sitting with them in their house or at a place that might be where their house once was, and you're having to relive that trauma to understand what's occurred. So you're asking them the questions to relive that, and you're being involved. You're understanding who they are, where they come from, what they occurred, and that person is really, putting a lot of that information onto you. And as a person, you're taking all of that trauma, and as humans, we will naturally take some of that trauma on as well, and understand and feel some level of emotion to that. And for building assessors in the insurance industry, you might do that 1 to up to 8 times a day, 5 to 7 days a week in a disaster sense or a catastrophe response, where you will just go from hearing emotional customers who are crying in your arms and feeling that sense of loss, and you'll leave that, you'll capture that information, you'll package that up, and then you'll move to the next customer, and you'll go through that again and again and again. And I think that has to anyone has an impact mentally, because I don't think there's many people out there that would not be able to walk away from that and go, that hasn't impacted me in some way, shape, or form.
You give us some real life examples from your own experiences with fire and floods about some high intense situations that you've had to deal with, and that others that do your job could have to deal with also. And then after that, maybe we could take it to coping responses about what you guys do or what you personally do.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's always lots of examples that resonate with me, but probably a couple that probably always sit in that bit of your mind that's always there. I've bushfires. I've had a claim where I was asked. It was an elderly couple in their 70s who lived in a remote part of northern New South Wales, and they lodged a claim for that they knew there was a bushfire. They'd heard from their neighbours that their property was lost. They were currently receiving medical treatment for the husband who had cancer. He was in Brisbane, who was receiving treatment. So they were staying in Brisbane at the time that the fire occurred. So they'd lodged a claim, but they hadn't been back to their property yet. And due to the long drive and stuff like that, people that would drive them. So on this instance, I was asked if residing in Brisbane, I was asked if I would be happy to drive them back to their property, which was about a 3.5 hour drive each way to this part of New South Wales. And so as you can imagine, you've 3.5 hours in a car getting to know a lovely couple who had been married for the best part of 40, 50 years and had just lost everything. And we were all going down to this property sight unseen. They hadn't seen their property that had been damaged since the fires, and they'd just been told that they'd been damaged. So none of us knew what we were going to drive into when we arrived. So as you can imagine, you're driving down, you're getting to know their life and their history, and then you arrive at the property to see that the whole property had been destroyed, and you could see that there was a lifetime of memories at this property that had been destroyed. And as an assessor, I was there to support the customer, assess the loss, work out what needed to happen, and all those things. But understanding that there was levels of their cover that just didn't cover everything. There was some classic cars, and there was a shed with some farm machinery, and a house that was just a slab on the ground. And seeing them there, supporting them with what I could do to try and find some level of their memories from their home. We found a few photos and things like that that managed to survive the fire, and a few heirlooms and things we were able to pick out. But as you can imagine, being there for, I think we were on the ground at their property for the best part of 2 to 3 hours, going through everything and just supporting them, has a lasting impact on you. And then, as you can imagine, they've arrived, they've seen that loss, you've felt that loss with them, and now 3.5 hours back in the car with them, and then essentially waving them goodbye when you get back to Brisbane, never to see them again, and professionally, not to contact them again and things like that. You're there to do a role and to be involved in that. Does have an impact on you, and to say that you don't shed a tear with them on site to feel that loss, I think is a big, there was definitely a lot of tears all round on that site when we arrived. I think that was the human emotion, that you're always going to feel that level of empathy with them, and loss, because you've driven down, you've got to know them, and then you felt that loss with them when you've arrived, supported them, and luckily we were able to provide them as much support as we could. There was elements where we couldn't either, and I had to give them that bad news, which doesn't feel great either, because you wish you could just give them everything you could. You wish you just give them a blank check and go rebuild everything you can, but that's not the case. But yeah, so that's definitely has its toll. I think another example, outside of the fire space, is I was quite heavily involved in the insurance response to the Lismore floods, which in Australia was quite a traumatic event, where we've seen inland flooding, into inland New South Wales, that was on a scale that we hadn't really seen in that area before, in recent times. And there was a lot of people that perished in those floods. So they were, the floods came up during the evening. People were caught out by surprise on how quickly the water rose, and they sought refuge by getting into their roof space, because they thought, these houses in this area of New South Wales are what we call almost a Queenslander. So they're built up. It's known that the land does sort of flood in those areas. So they're high-set homes with a staircase. They might be built up, anywhere between 3 and 5 meters off the ground, and then you've got a single-story dwelling on top. And so, as you can imagine, these waters came up, to the top of telegraph poles. We're talking nearly 10, 20 meters high. And so people were, I'll get in my roof space. The water's come up into my house, but I'll be okay. I'll get into my roof cavity. And then, unfortunately, the water came into the roof cavity, and a lot of people perished in their roofs. And so that they couldn't get out. They got trapped in their roof space. There was a lot of conjecture at that time around the response, and did emergency services respond quick enough, and things like that, and a lot of learnings that come out of that. But the Australian public, basically anyone within 50 kilometres that had a boat started dropping their boats into these floodwaters and going house by house, rescuing people off the roof of their house, tearing roofs open to get people out. And so, as an insurance assessor, we were on the ground as the water was receding. So we were in there very soon after the event occurred to help people start, assessing that loss, and understanding. And again, we were in there, and at that time, in the position I was almost a manager. So I was helping a team of people. And we went into the area, and one of the first streets that I went to, I was supporting a customer, just as they'd identified in a couple of houses down the road that there was a whole family of 4 that had perished in the roof space of the house, and had only just been identified. And so you're really seeing that trauma unfold within that community. Again, a rural community in New South Wales. Most people in that community know each other, have lived there for a long time. So seeing, the property that I was at, those customers that I was dealing with knew this family that they just seen, heard had perished was very raw and was quite traumatic to see unfold. And hearing the stories of survival from customers that you would go to house after house after house, and hearing their different tale of survival, of how they got on their roof, they were rescued by a helicopter, their house was flooding, and they were holding their children up in the air, and a boat came in the middle of the night to get them out. So you were hearing these tales of survival that were very raw and very fresh. And so, these people were still very emotional, crying, upset, some frustrated over the response of things. And that frustration would boil over at times. And, why weren't you here quick enough, and things like that. So a very different level of trauma down there, from being with a lovely couple, married all their life, and feeling that trauma, to then going in as a building assessor to then go house after house after house and seeing trauma and having people with different levels of reaction to that trauma, laying that onto you as an assessor was definitely had its toll. And, I'm, even to today, Lismore's, best part of almost 2 years on, we're coming up to in February, March. And I'm still going into Lismore as in my role now as a building assessor on the building side, repairing Lismore. So there's still a lot happening there, and that takes its toll. And I think, you asked before, Mike, the mechanisms of coping. I think that kind of rolls into how I've coped with it, not just the building side, but the fire side as well. Is I like to hope that I've dealt with it in the right ways. I think at this stage I have a very supportive wife who I can talk to about lots of things. I have supportive friends who I can talk to about these things. And I think talking is a very important thing. I've, like yourself, Mike, we've got colleagues in the service and in the industries who have struggled, and definitely still struggling for some of them. I think talking is a huge part of being able to cope and understand, and acknowledging in yourself, building up those abilities within yourself to go, no, I'm not okay, I need to talk to somebody. And knowing that talking to somebody, be it a colleague or a professional, there's so many different professional avenues out there now that employers offers, from employee support services, which are predominantly free of charge, that are provided to us as employees for ourselves and our family, as well as emergency services having their support networks, and how they support their employees. I think is being in yourself, going, yes, I need to go and speak to that, is really important. And can be a big step at times to go, I need to seek that help. That's the first step, and I think that's the biggest part. And having the people around you to support you, to call it out for you as well. And usually it's when it comes from someone you care about who tells you, can sometimes give you that step to go, okay, maybe I do need to do that. But I think in my space, I've seen a lot of people like yourself, Mike, around that have struggled, that it's kind of become similar to some of the other chats we had around technology, a passion to me to be able to pass on knowledge, to sort of say, hey, this is what I've seen, and this is how I cope with things. Might not be how you should cope with it, but you should at least know that if you're feeling like this, put your hand up. It's okay to put your hand up, and put your own hand up to say, I need to have a chat. I think there's some really great, my core skill is I'm a carpenter by trade, and there's a lot of building industry support groups out there for men and women now, and there's a brand called Trade Mutt. You might have seen the shirts out. They're quite leery, very fancy, leery looking construction shirts, bright colours and designs and stuff on them. And it's all about wearing that shirt to start a conversation. And I think that's really important, to be able to say, well, let's start a conversation if you're not feeling okay, and let's have a chat about it.
Brian, I'd like to interject some real quick because I've been lucky enough to know you for a number of years now. And the one thing that I've seen about you over the years is that you're community oriented, that you feel for people, that you want to help people. It's one of your motivations, which I think I see about you. And so I think that this must really hit you hard when you're dealing with these type of incidents. And I'm curious when you're talking about it's important to speak to people. What do you think is important to speak about? Do you think it's about releasing those emotions or trying to get a better understanding on what happened to get your head around events? What do you think is a reason why it's important that we as first responders or whatever we're doing out there that deal in high intensity emotions, why do we need to talk to people?
No, look, I think it's important to talk about what you've seen. Um, in my opinion, um, I think it's important to be able to talk to someone and acknowledging that you can't always chat to everybody about what you've seen. You might not be able to talk to your loved one or your significant other or your mother, your father, brother, sister, because you might end up inadvertently passing that trauma on to them. So it's understanding that talking to the right people is important about what you've seen. But I think that's important because, if you're seeing something like that for the first time, you mentioned before about, learning about what you've seen as well is important as well because you might be feeling that trauma because you're like, is that right? Did I do the right thing? Is because what I did that cause a reaction to something that's happened? There's always usually lots of question marks because, as first responders, we don't always have the outcome that is the best for the person that we're going to help. A couple of the key things that I've always been told that's really sat with me is that, as a firefighter or as an insurance assessor, and then I relate it to the insurance assessing as well, but as a firefighter, I was always told every job you go to, you're turning up and you turning up gave that person the best chance possible. So you're turning up with all the skills that you've got, with the truck that you've got, with the best equipment that you can have, with the best training and the best crew that you can have. You gave that person the best chance that they could ever have. If you didn't turn up, they were never going to have a good chance because you didn't turn up with that great gear and that great training. So the outcome that happened was the best that could have happened with what you gave. So if unfortunately that person did pass away, or if you didn't turn up, they were going to pass away 100% that they were going to pass away. If they passed away anyways, it was beyond the ability of you being able to help that because you turned up with the best you could, and that was the best firefighters and the firefighting equipment and the other emergency personnel, might be the paramedics and the police and the other rescue personnel. And I take that into the insurance space as well. I turn up, or my colleagues will turn up with the best training and the best skills and the best knowledge they have to give the best outcome they can. And if the outcome to that isn't, the perfect outcome, they gave the best they could with the information that they had and the information that they could provide and the support that they could provide. And I think that's always kind of resonated with me is that, if it was, unfortunately, someone passed away or the claim was declined or whatever it might be, walking away from that going, well, I gave them 110% of what I could give. I know I've done the right thing. But then talking about what I've seen, and that is then important to have those after action reviews, and catch ups with your team to see how you're all feeling and learn from it. There's nothing that you will ever go into a job or into an insurance assessment where you can't take something out of it to learn. Every opportunity is a learning opportunity. And that's something that's always kind of sat with me. I think one of the other important parts is people understanding that, any event that happens, and how we take on trauma and how we deal with it is always remembering a couple of key things in my opinion is that, everything's learning. We always learn and things. So if something doesn't go to plan, that's not your fault, or that's not your fault. That's a learning opportunity for somebody. And so how can you take your experience of that, turn it into a conversation to then help other people, help you, talk about what's happened and what you've seen and felt and dealt with, and potentially pass that on so that, yourself can learn on how to deal with something that might be different to the normal, from what you've experienced previously. I think another important thing is understanding that, you can't, don't, personal opinion again is don't keep thinking the what ifs and the what mights and the hows and all of those sorts of things, because that's not healthy. It will eat you out, and definitely embrace the things you do. Enjoy. You used to smoke jump. I used to skydive. We didn't think about the what ifs every time we were going to go out the door. We were doing it because we enjoyed what we do, and we had a goal and training and all of those things that we were going down to achieve a task or an outcome that we enjoyed. And yet there were times where things might not gone to plan, but we take that and we learn from it. We talk about it and we move on, and moving on in those positive ways of learning what's going on, talking about it, and enjoying the positives that we provided. We go up there and it might be a traumatic incident. We were there because we were the best we could be and the best people with the best training, and that's why we were up there. And we didn't start the fire, or we didn't cause what was happening up there. We were going up there because we're tasked with an outcome. So understanding that's that part of it, and if it doesn't go to plan, talk about it, learn from it, adapt to it, and then package it up, put it on the shelf, and move on to the next part, and enjoying what you do. And I think a key thing there is that if you really are sitting there not enjoying it anymore and rethinking about it too much and you can't get rid of it, then I think it's that part of being honest within yourself to go, is this actually right for me? Because it's not for everybody, and if it's not for that person, that's completely okay too. But understanding that if you can't adapt and overcome, and it really is eating you out that much, then maybe talking about it is important, but also understanding that, well, do I put myself back in that situation again next time as well is important.
Is there anything else you would like to add, Grant, about other coping ideas that you could recommend to other people dealing with trauma from high intensity events?
Don't bottle it up. That's probably a big one that I can say to people. Don't bottle it up. If you're sitting at home or at work or driving along and you're thinking about it, then you probably need to talk about it. Is probably a good one, because if you're thinking about it, you're thinking about it potentially too much. That's gonna, that might end up bottling up too much. And so that's important. Avenues, there's a number of free in Australia. There's free avenues. There's Lifeline. There's men's health groups. There's women's health groups. There's all sorts of different avenues that you can go to. You can jump on the internet and I need help. There's a huge amount of opportunity for support out there these days. So putting your hand up and saying, I need help, is the best thing and the best decision that anyone can ever make. And don't ever feel scared to do it, because it's probably the biggest relief factor that you'll get after you've done it. So, and most people will walk away going, I wish I did that sooner. Yeah, I've never met anyone that's never come back after putting their hand up that said, geez, they all say, I wish I would have done that sooner. So I think that's really important to say that. I've never met anyone who said, I wish I wouldn't have done it sooner.
Well, Grant, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on board with us and talking about this really important subject that doesn't always get talked about. And we really appreciate it.
Anytime.
We're doing this for all of you. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up. hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. See you next time.